On this episode of Goulet Q&A, I talk about why Noodlers is called Noodlers, my top 10 favorite pens, at least as of the moment, and crossing things off your bucket list. Well, hey there, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and this is episode number 105 of Goulet Q&A. It is December 11th of 2015, and it's been pretty crazy around here. We're in our holiday season. This is our busiest time of year around the Goulet shop. We have had no shortage of drama, most of which goes on behind the scenes, so you don't see it too much. We've had power outages, internet outages, not power outages actually, internet outages, sorry. We've had, crazy stuff going on in people's personal lives around here. We've had, you name it. But everybody's still working their tails off to get you your stuff as quickly as possible. And we are having what I would consider to be a pretty successful holiday season so far. We've done a lot to prepare for it and we're ready to go. You may notice my beard is gone. I know as of last week, I was still kind of on the fence about it. And I had shot it, Thursday morning, Q&A last week, and by Saturday it was gone. So, I just talked to Rachel, and, she kind of just likes me a little cleaner, better. Of course, now I got a several day stubble going on. I actually do miss it a little bit. It is warmer, I'll say that. But I immediately looked like way younger as soon as I shaved it. And I got a haircut too, so I'm just like all kinds of feeling different. Anyway, we had our company Christmas party or holiday party, whatever you want to call it, on Sunday. We had it at Maggiano's, which is pretty cool. We had it there the year before as well. Had a good time, great food. So that was really kind of cool. We ended up doing a casino night kind of thing. So we had a company come in and do, craps table, roulette, blackjack, and all that kind of stuff. Then we had raffle prizes and whatnot. A few pens in there, of course. But that was really kind of fun. So everybody got to just have a really good time. It was awesome. 100% attendance on our holiday party. So that was really, really pretty cool. So that was a lot of fun. And then I got to cross something off of my bucket list this week. I've always wanted to see the Trans-Siberian Orchestra live. I'm not like a huge fan or anything, but their music is pleasant, and it's kind of like a safe environment to listen to rock and roll. It's very kind of like family friendly. So it's one of those things that I've just kind of talked about for years. And I literally have not been to any type of like rock concert since I was in college. And even that was very small. Before that, I was 15 when I went to see the Red Hot Chili Peppers, which was pretty awesome. Foo Fighters opened for them. That was awesome. But this was the first one, and literally like 2 weeks ago, Rachel bought these tickets because she just knew it would be something I would enjoy. She arranged for babysitting for the kids and everything, so it was kind of cool. She surprised me with that, so that was really, really kind of neat. So I don't really have like a written down bucket list. I just have certain things like I want to see Cirque du Soleil live at some point. I would love to do, they have a Handel's Messiah sing-along at the Kennedy Center up in DC every year. I would love to do that at some point. Rachel and I just need to make that happen. But, there's several things like that. It's not a very extensive bucket list, and it's really not very fancy or impressive either, but that's one of my things. So that was one thing. I was really super thrilled. I have this epic shirt to now show off as a result, and it's even got like all the tour like cities and everything on the back, so that's kind of cool. Got a band shirt now. But anyway, so that's kind of neat. So it was just something, still just like it would. And I will say, like, if you have never seen them live, it was really, really cool. Really cool. Great show. Very talented group of people. So that was really awesome. Some new products that we've had going on. This is kind of like coming on the end of our huge slew of new stuff that's been coming in, I don't know, for the last 5 months. But really just for the holiday season here, we've had a slew of new stuff coming in. We've been trying to photograph it, get to know it, take measurements, you name it, get it listed on the site. So we've had the Edison Nouveau Premier Winter Edition Mystical Myrrh. That just launched last week, and it's been very popular so far. It's very interesting pattern, very different than kind of what we've done before. I mean, not very different. We've done swirls and stuff before, but never like a tri-pattern swirl. So that's kind of cool. So we're excited about that. The Visconti Opera Master Blue Swirl is new. I don't have it like to whip out for you here, but we are selling that now. It is not an inexpensive pen, but it has this cool blue crystal inkwell to accompany it as well. And of course it's blue, so I love it. But anyway, we are going to be doing a little video on that here coming up soon. And then we had the Visconti Opera Master which in Crimson Tide, which has been in the rose gold trim. Now we have the Ruthenium trim, finally. It was originally called Black Rhodium, and then it changed to gunmetal, and now it's Ruthenium. It's the material is actually Ruthenium. So it's palladium nib, the same Dream Touch nib with the Ruthenium plating. So it's kind of like that gunmetal type color. So the official name has kind of changed a little bit, but it's Ruthenium now, officially. We have a video out on that, so you can check that out. Put a lot of work into that video. Visconti also has the Art of Writing set, which is kind of interesting. We're working on a quick look video for that. Should be out very, very soon. That should be kind of interesting. Multiple nib, things that you can swap out. If you never used a writing set, it comes with different grip sections you can swap out on the pen. So it's really kind of cool. Filofax has a new color called Pear. So that is out now. And then Atelier Gargoyle is a company out of San Francisco that makes sealing wax, really, flexible sealing wax that has essential oils in it, so it's scented, so it smells really good. They have 18 different colors, including a royal blue, which looks awesome. So that's really cool. So that we've been aware of them, honestly, ever since we've been in business. We've had people asking us to carry their stuff, but they've always been direct retailers. Now they're opening up to wholesale to other retailers like us. So they reached out to us a couple of months ago and said, hey, would you be interested in carrying this? And we were like, sure. So now we are. And then some stuff that's coming up. We're going to have the Kaweco Metallic Purple coming out. I don't know when. I just know that we're going to get them at some point. So, next several weeks, maybe. I don't have an exact date. Also, Filofax is going to be coming out with a larger size of their notebook, an A4 size, in all the colors that we carry. So that'll be coming out again in a to be determined date. And then TWSBI is coming out with their Vac-mini pretty much right at Christmas, so you won't get it in time for Christmas, that's for sure. But we are going to have it right around that time. So the Vac-mini and then the Vac-20A bottle, which is a redesigned Vac bottle that fits the Vac-mini, will be coming out at the same time as well. All right, let's get into it this week. Got some pen and writing questions. First one. This is from Ricky J on Facebook. I have many fine pens, however, none of them seem to give me shading unless I'm using a flex pen for normal handwriting. Do you know why that's the case? I would really like to not have to write super broad because my handwriting is small to get the shading effect. Any suggestions? Well, shading is something that really depends a lot on the volume of ink that you're putting down on the page. And when you're using a finer nib, it's just flat out putting less ink on the page than it is when you use something like a medium broad stub, flex, especially flex ink. Flex pens put tons of ink down on the page. So that has a lot to do with it. Ink definitely comes into play. Ink can make a big difference. So let me just talk about all the things that can kind of affect your shading and maybe some things that you can do to adjust it. So there are some pens that have wetter writing fine nibs than others. So even though it's the same tip size, the volume of ink that it puts down has a lot to do with the feed design and the converter, cartridge, whatever design, how that relationship works. You can't really just look at a pen and tell that, but there are pens that have reputations for writing wetter than others. Pens like Visconti, Lamy tend to be a little bit wetter than, say, Pilot, Platinum, etc. Generally, the Japanese pens tend to write a little on the drier side than a lot of your European brands do. That's a very broad generalization, but that's often the case. So using flex pens definitely does help. Pens with gold or like a gold-like nib, like a palladium or titanium, they're usually wetter than steel nibs because steel nibs are very stiff. So when you're writing, especially with any kind of pressure, they're not really going to change much. But when you're writing with a softer nib, the pressure is going to change. It's going to tend to write wetter. So that right there can make a huge difference. Even if you have a nib with a very similar design, such as Lamy, their Lamy steel nibs that they have on the Safari, All-Star, etc., they will write, you know, a pretty decent line. And then if you use the exact same type of nib, like on the Palladium Studio, for example, that has, or a Dialog 3 or something like that, that has a gold nib that looks just like the steel one, but it's gold, it is much softer, much wetter. So that has a lot to do with it. The paper can also make a big difference. So using very ink-resistant paper, you know, that makes a difference no matter what nib size you're using, but especially with fines. If you're using something that's very absorbent, it's going to tend to soak in and flatten out that ink. And if you're using something that isn't putting a lot of ink down to begin with, you're going to have a hard time getting some good shading out of it. And then lesser saturated inks like, you know, J.Herbin, I would say Waterman, Schaefer, some Visconti's, Pelikan, a Roshizuku, depending on the color. They usually, inks that are coming from pen makers tend to be less saturated in color than some of the boutique brands like Diamine, Noodler's, Private Reserve. So again, that's a broad generalization. It's not the case for every ink within every brand, but the ink can be a big factor if you're using a less saturated ink, meaning there's less dye content in the ink. You're going to tend to have a better shading because the ink, as it is put into a heavier place, such as when you're writing at the bottom of a curve of a letter, or if you're using a flex when you put with more pressure, where it pools up, it's going to be more concentrated, and in the lighter parts, like at the tops of your letters, it's going to tend to be less saturated in its dye content. So that's basically what shading is right there. And then another thing I would say is don't use permanent inks, because most permanent inks tend to be fairly flat in color, and they also tend to absorb more into the paper and kind of flatten and spread out. Also quick drying inks too. So using those really on any nib, you're not going to get great shading to begin with. So those are just kind of some tips that can maybe help you out. All right, Lev N on Facebook asked, what are some other pens that have interchangeable nibs, not like Jinhao or Noodlers? What are some pens that offer really extra fine nibs that you can special order on Goulet pens? Let's see here, interchangeable nibs. So you kind of asked me two questions here. Everything that I have that has an interchangeable nib, Edison does. Monteverde and Conklin, you can swap the nibs out of those. TWSBI, for many of their pens, not all of them, the Eco doesn't, but you can, many of them, the Classic doesn't, but you can for the Mini, the 580, the VAC 700. The Pilot Vanishing Point has interchangeable nib units. Lamy nibs, except for the Lamy 2000, are interchangeable. All the rest of them are. And that's kind of it as far as ones that I have that have interchangeable nibs. Now ones, you know, and then there's other pens that are kind of a number 6 size where you can take a number 6 nib like a Goulet nib or a Noodler's or an Edison or even the TWSBI Vac 700 are number 6. Monteverde and Conklin nibs are number 6 for the most part. So you can swap a lot of number 6 nibs with each other. It doesn't always work out perfectly because you are mixing and matching brands and, you know, all that. But there are a number of pens out there that have kind of that size that you can swap out. But these ones that I just mentioned here are the ones that have like their own nibs that swap with their own pens, if that makes sense. As far as pens that offer really fine, really extra fine nibs that I can special order, the best extra fine nibs usually come from Japanese companies, you know, Platinum, Pilot. Let's see here. We carry all the Pilot that we can and just about all the Platinum. There might be a couple of pen bodies of Platinum, like some of the celluloids and some of that kind of stuff that we don't carry, but they don't really have any extra fine nibs on those that we don't already have. We do have an extra fine and an ultra extra fine on the 3776. That is really fine. And those are pretty smooth too, for what they are. So I honestly don't really have any really extra fine nibs that I can special order, because if they have really extra fine nibs, we're carrying it if we can possibly get it. So, you know, that's kind of where I'm at there. So I don't really have any like secret extra fine nibs around. You can see all of them on gouletpens.com as to what there are. And there's a faceted search on the left-hand side. You can search for like extra fine or ultra extra fine. But those are pretty much going to be all the options for what I have. Now, other things out there might be either custom grind or stuff that's available overseas that's not available in the US, or from a brand I don't carry, but that is kind of the majority of what I have. Denise K on Facebook says, if I wanted the smoothest nib available in an extra fine, or at most a fine, what should I be looking at? But if I wanted to see what really smooth felt like in my preferred line width, what should be on my wish list? I already have such pens as a Lamy Safari extra fine, a TWSBI 580 All extra fine, and a Pilot Metropolitan extra fine. Japanese nibs are generally finer. Yes, that is the case. But Pilot, I find, makes really good fine nibs. I really like the fine that they have on their Custom 74, the Custom 823, the Metropolitan, like you have here. The Vanishing Point is a really decent fine nib. The extra fine tends to be a little bit on the feedbacky side for my taste, but still, it's a very, very fine extra fine. You know, so that one I might kind of more push you towards the fine nib, honestly. They have other pens like the E95S, the Stargazer, the Justice 95. All of those fine nibs are going to be pretty darn smooth. So actually, Pilot's got a pretty good range. Platinum makes good fine and extra fine nibs that are very fine, but their nibs tend to have a little more feedback to them. So I'm hesitant to kind of recommend those just because you are looking for the smoothest available. Some other ones, let's see here, the Platinum Preppy extra fine is actually pretty darn good, even for a $5 pen. Is pretty smooth for how fine that nib is. And actually Faber-Castell, their extra fine nib is really, really good, really extra fine. Very stiff, so not quite as soft as some of the Pilot ones, but really not too bad at all. So that should give you a good jumping point. I got business question, just one business question here today. This is from Donovan P on Facebook. It says, would you by any chance be privy, I like that word, privy, to why Nathan named his company Noodlers? Yeah, why the heck is an ink company named after Noodlers, and why is the logo a catfish? Well, those two terms are related. For those of you that don't know, noodling is a, I guess you could call it a sport. It's not really an official sport, but it's more of a tradition, sort of, that's passed down mainly in kind of some of the southern states in the US. Essentially what it is fishing with your bare hands. So you're not using any bait or lures or anything like that. Generally the term is used for catfish, especially flathead catfish. And I've never done this. I've done a little research on it and seen it on Dirty Jobs and some other TV shows and stuff like that. But basically the concept is catfish, they bury like themselves into holes in, you know, ponds and stuff like that. And the sport of noodling is you swim down anywhere between a couple of feet up to like maybe even 20 feet underwater, and you find a catfish hole, you stick your hand into the catfish hole, and the defense mechanism that the catfish have is to bite so that they can either get out or scare away whatever's coming. So you stick your hand in there, they bite your hand, and then you pull it out. And these catfish are not like little fish. These are generally like about 40 pounds. So you're pulling this 40-pound fish up out of its home, basically, and kind of wrangling it up to the surface. And that essentially is noodling. It's kind of a dangerous sport. It's actually been outlawed in several states because of, I guess, safety concerns and overfishing and stuff like that. But you know, it's got its traditions, and Noodlers has it on their site. It says, I quote, "The ink with the catfish on the label symbolizes a southern sport that attempts to equalize the struggle between man and animal in the quest for a sense of fair play, and thus a fair price." So it kind of ties in as far as Nathan Tardif, and who, as far as I understand, is a noodler himself. He has done this, and which is not wildly shocking, but you know, it's in his kind of explanation, it's kind of leveling the playing field, which for him, if you look at Noodlers and the price of their ink and all the things that he looks to do, it kind of makes sense. So he is viewing it as you know, that kind of fair equity kind of thing, which kind of ties into his idea of economics and other things that you can see as kind of themes, a lot of his political kind of undertones that he has, sometimes not even undertones, overtones often for, for some of his ink designs and labels and such. So that really is kind of where it comes from. Personal stuff. Got a few personal questions this week. Oliver M on Facebook says, has Brian considered getting a fountain pen tattoo? Could be cool in blue. Pen tattoo. I can't remember if I've been asked this before, honestly, but I have never really had an interest in getting tattoos. A lot of our team here actually is tattooed. I don't know exact numbers, but I would say probably half of our staff is. It's way less taboo than it used to be. I remember growing up, a tattoo was like, you know, not something that you would do unless you were kind of rebelling against something. But now it seems much more acceptable. You know, even in like, you know, a lot of like religious circles that used to kind of frown upon that, it's now like getting like more like religious tattoos is kind of in vogue, I guess. But I personally have never really had much of an interest in getting one, just personally. So don't go making bets on which one I would get anytime soon. But if I did, it would certainly make sense for me to get something pen related, given how much of my life I have to, you know, attribute to fountain pens and my passion for pens. Honestly, getting something like a blue ink splatter would be kind of cool. You know, I would never do it, but if I were to dream it up, I would say getting the blue ink splatter would be very symbolic of everything I've done. And if not that, then I would say probably like some paint, like spray on abs, like in the movie 300. That would be kind of cool. That would be like my backup. Maybe I could get a giant blue splatter on my back and then some like 300 style abs for the front. That might work. Since it's never gonna happen anyway, let's go with that. That's probably what I would do. Adam Harris on YouTube says, y'all have quite a following on social media, myself included, and seem to have become celebrity/rock stars of the fountain pen world. I don't know about that, but yeah, okay, in the fountain pen world, I'll give you that. In your daily living, out shopping, dining, airports, etc., how often do people out in public recognize you and introduce themselves as fans or enthusiasts? Okay, so when we go to a pen show, like we go to the DC Pen Show every year, that's when it really hits us like, oh wow, people do really know who we are at this point, because we've gone to that show every year. First couple of years, people didn't know us at all. But then as we started to do more blogs and videos and stuff, people started to know it a lot more. And this past one that we had in August was crazy. It was kind of like, and we just walked around the show. We didn't get a booth or anything. But it was like, I need to get to the bathroom over there. It took me half an hour to get over there because people just kept coming up and talking, which was really, really cool. And it wasn't like rock star, like, oh my gosh. It was more just like, oh man, your videos are so helpful. Thank you so much. This is cool. Can we get a selfie? That was really kind of it. But that was cool. But that is like an alternate reality. Going to a pen show in general is really an alternate reality, because you go from like being the only person in your office like, I like pens, you know, and everybody else is like, well, weirdo. But you know, when you go to a pen show, it's all weirdos, you know, and it's wonderful. So you go and you're like, I like pens, and somebody's like, so do I. Oh my gosh, look at my pens. Wow. And you're like whipping out 20, 30, 40 pens, and people are like, oh my gosh, oh, I love that. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of how it is. Literally, that's how some people are. It's really kind of cool. If you've never been to a pen show, you should at least go to one at some point, because it's quite an experience, especially if you go into DC, because that's definitely the biggest, from what I've heard. I've never been to any others, but that one is really cool. So anyway, aside from that I don't really consider being recognized in public, because like we say that we're going there and we let everybody in the fountain pen world, hey, we're going to this thing, please come and say hi. So we're inviting that. In the outside world, I actually really kind of like the situation that I have here. I seem very like, you know, outgoing and very public and very whatever. I'm actually very much kind of an introvert. Rachel and I both are. So we are very happy to just kind of stay at home and be with family and stuff like that. We're not like out partying and stuff, despite the rocking out at the concert last night. You know, even that, it was like, we just kind of we were literally in the back row and we were like, this is cool. It's cool. We'll just kind of hang out. You know, for all of that, where was I going with that? I need to like look at my notes to even talk about this. I've only been actually recognized twice ever, and it actually hasn't been for quite a while. It's not as much as you think. And I even grew up in this area, and I don't even really often run into like people I knew from high school or anything. Like my kids are going through basically the same school district that I went through, but I don't even really run into people that I know that much. So it's just not, you know, I don't know. It's not like a huge part, but I really like the setup I have. Oh, I know where I was going with that. I'm making that synapse again. Basically, I sit here and I record these videos. I engage online. Love it. This is great. I love my fountain pen peeps, and you guys are awesome, and I love doing that kind of thing. But then it's like when I need to go to the grocery store, I'm just a regular old dude. Like nobody knows who I am. It's great. You know, I pick up my kids. I go to, you know, events with, you know, things at my church and stuff like that. And I'm just like, I mean, everybody knows like I'm the pen guy, but I'm not like, oh my gosh, it's Brian Goulet. Everybody's like, you do what? Fountain pens? People buy those? That's usually the reaction I get. So it's kind of cool. So it doesn't get to my head, you know, which I can imagine like if you were somebody who was famous and getting recognized all the time, every place you went, like I can imagine how you would start to view the world differently and start to act kind of kooky and crazy, you know, because it has to screw with your head with people like, you know, just going gaga over you everywhere you go. That's not how it is for me at all. So in the 6 years I've been doing this, only 2 people ever have recognized me in public. One of which was fairly close by. It's the local Best Buy that's near our office here. I think I was going to buy a computer monitor or something like that. And I went and somebody recognized me in the parking lot. It was actually one of the Best Buy employees. He's like, oh my gosh, you Brian Goulet? And I was like, yeah. This was maybe 3 years ago. And he's like, oh my gosh, like I watch your videos and that's really cool. Oh, actually, you know what? Sorry, there's 3 instances. Okay, I just remembered another one. So that was one, getting recognized by a Best Buy employee. And he's like, oh yeah, everybody on the Geek Squad loves your videos. And I'm like, oh, great. You know, the Geek Squad, you know, I'm kidding. But no, that's really cool. So like the little local Best Buy here. Another time, which I'd already forgotten about actually, was when I was at Chick-fil-A. And there was a local high school kid that was like, oh yeah, I watched your video in my French class. And I was like, your French class? She's like, yeah, it's a video on your how to use French ruled paper. And I was like, oh my gosh, that video is like one of the worst ones I've ever done because I don't really know what I'm talking about in that video. I just like put it together because I knew very little about French ruled paper, but it was better than nothing. So I was like, well, let me just put out what I know. And he's like, yeah, my teacher is using that to teach about French rule. And I was like, oh, great. But it was very much like, not like going gaga. He's like, oh yeah, I've seen you. That was it. And then the only other time, so those were both kind of weird. The only other time was even weirder. So Rachel and I took our kids to Disney World, and we were in the Magic Kingdom, right near like the Peter Pan ride. And our kids needed to go to the bathroom, as all kids do all the time at the least convenient locations. So we were like packing up the stroller. You have to like park your stroller and get all your junk together and whatnot. And somebody was like, oh my gosh, you're Brian Goulet. And I was like, what? Yes. I was like, did you like read the name on the stroller or something like that? He's like, no. He's like, I'm a big fan of yours. I love your pens, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, that's really cool. I was like, oh, hey, where are you from? He's like, I'm from the Netherlands. And I was like, what? So apparently somebody from the Netherlands ran into us as we were getting our kids ready to go to the bathroom at the Magic Kingdom at Disney World. So I got a selfie. I was like, give me your phone. I was like, let's do a selfie together. Like, this will never happen again. So we got a selfie, and I was like, okay, bye. What's your Twitter handle? And then I, you know, just tweeted and said, hey, what's up? And then gone, never heard from again. So really random. So those are the 3 times. But it was very much like just random things. It's not even something I really think about very much at all. Now I need to like edit my notes because I remembered a 3rd time. All right. Jim C on Facebook asked, what are your top 10 favorite pens? And I get asked about this time to time. Usually it's like a top 5 or top 3 or my favorite pen ever, that kind of thing. This is top 10, so I feel like, okay. At this point, honestly, I have, I think, over 400 pens. So I very much have a pen problem, everybody. Oh my gosh. My name is Brian, and I have a pen problem. But I made a list. Okay, it's 10, and I will say, like, it's not in order. I didn't like think about it like, oh yeah, this is definitely my top 10 list. Because honestly, they're all like my children. I love all my pens. I very much am an acquirer slash accumulator slash hoarder of pens. I love them, and I have a huge pen cabinet over here filled with pens, and I never get rid of any of them. That's part of my obsession slash addiction. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. Well, sort of. So as far as like my favorites, okay, I made a top 10 list of like 10 of like the kind of my favorite slash more meaningful pens to me. It is not an exhaustive list. Like, I have more than 10 pens that really mean something to me and are really important, have been pens that I really, really like, or you know, ones that are particularly meaningful in like the development of the Goulet Pen Company and my own personal kind of growth and stuff like that. So there are going to be pens left off of here that are meaningful to me that won't be on this list. So forgive me if I leave any off, particularly if there are any manufacturers or vendors watching that I represent that are going to feel disappointed the fact I didn't say theirs was the best. It's okay. I love, seriously, all the pens that I carry, but some ones that are just kind of worth me talking about. Of course, I have my Blue Pilot Custom 74. At this point now, it's more just like kind of iconic and representative of kind of who I am and what I do, but it's, you know, it's a blue pen, which I love. It was my first gold nib pen, and I love the way that it writes. I did many, I mean, literally thousands of the earliest handwritten thank you notes for the Goulet Pen Company was done with this pen. So it's well broken in, and it's well broken in through writing notes of gratitude to our earliest customers that helped to get this company off the ground. So that, if nothing else, is why this pen is so meaningful to me. But I also really just like the way that it writes. Lamy 2000, this is more of just kind of a practical one. This was like one of the first gold nib pens I had. It's also very kind of iconic, and I love the design, the style of it. It might have been my first piston. No, my Noodler's was my first piston fill pen, but anyway. The Pilot Vanishing Point is another one. This is the Twilight, which we don't have any more of, but it was a special edition, limited edition, sorry. And I really I'm a big fan of the Vanishing Point. I have a matte black one that I use actually more than this one, but the Twilight one I really love the style of this one. The ombre look, but the Vanishing Point is a very kind of iconic and important pen to us here and to me personally. The Edison Nouveau Premier, this is the latest one, the Mystical Myrrh, so it's not this particular one necessarily, but it's more just the pen in general. The Premier really represents an ongoing relationship that we've had with Edison Pen Company. If we had not helped to design this pen together, you know, maybe Edison would not have gone the route of making production line pens, because this was the first production line pen that Edison had ever done. And I definitely will selfishly take credit for kind of pushing Brian Gray in that direction. He was kind of already thinking about the idea anyway, but it was very much like our collaboration that was like, we wanted to encourage him to do that. And so this pen is an exclusive that we've had for almost 5 years now. And this is the latest of our seasonal editions. That's why I have that handy, but that pen really kind of represents a lot as well as far as like how much we've grown in Goulet pens. I have to have a Visconti in here because that is also kind of a benchmark for us, you know, getting into some more of the luxury brands. Omas was really kind of like more what I consider our first luxury brand, but Visconti was one that we had pursued for 3 or 4 years. And just this year we made that relationship happen. And of course their iconic pen is the Homo Sapiens, and the pen is just made a freaking volcano. So that is just really, really cool. Love the way that it writes. It's a vacuum filler, which I also dig totally. And I really like the hook safe lock that they have on this pen and the Divina. And the Divina is another, you know, top pen, but I didn't have it on this list. But also very cool. Also kind of what it represents is kind of like a new opportunity, new relationship we sparked with them. I have the Monteverde Invincia Nighthawk, and this is a several years discontinued pen. It was only available for a very short period of time, but it was a collaboration that we did with Monteverde. It was an exclusive pen. It's a matte black satin carbon fiber pen, or matte carbon fiber, what do you want to call it? So it's like a completely stealthed out pen black nib and everything. And honestly, it's just, I had a hand in the design, so it was kind of like I got to help come up with it. Had some manufacturing issues. We were not able to continue to make it, but I still love that pen. It's got a special place in my heart. Next one I might throw you for a loop a little bit. The Noodler's Ahab, actually. Noodlers in general, like for those of you that have been around in the fountain pen world for 5 years or more, there was a time when you really couldn't get a flex pen. It was not something that many people had. And I very much attribute Nathan Tardif and the Noodler's pens to the fact that flex nibs are now much more commonplace. So you're seeing other pen companies coming out with more soft nibs and flex nib options because people want it, and it's much more popular now than it used to be, which honestly has sparked a lot of creativity and interest in writing in general. So the Ahab wasn't the first of the pens to come out, but it's personally, of the Noodler's pens, it's the one that I enjoy writing with the most. My hands are a little larger, and I find it to be really the most kind of reliable and best all-around performing for the Noodler's pens. So that's why I chose the Ahab, but really it's kind of more just the Noodler's pens in general are particularly meaningful, not just to me and what Noodler's has done to help Goulet grow over the years, but really we should all be thanking Noodler's and Nathan Tardif specifically for not only the inks he's done, but kind of pushing that envelope and coming up with an affordable flex pen that has really honestly had quite an influence on writing over the last couple of years. The next one I have, we're really getting super meaningful now. Next one I have is this one, which is actually a ballpoint. And don't go flipping the channel or shutting off the YouTube video or whatever you want to say. This is the first pen that I ever made, and it really was what started the Goulet Pen Company. So this pen, it's not that great. It's pretty bad as far as how it's made, and it's now got some cracks and stuff that have happened over time because I didn't use the right wood and I made it wrong and all this kind of stuff. But the backstory of Goulet pens is I started out on a whim making pens out of wood on a lathe, hand turning them, and that ended up turning into, you know, doing corporate gifts and stuff like that, which we then tried to roll into fountain pens, ended up not making pens anymore, but now we retail fountain pens. So if we had not first started making pens like this, there's no way I would have ever gotten into fountain pens. Not like I have. So essentially the Goulet Pen Company would not exist without my making, you know, this pen and just immediately being like, oh my gosh, this is cool. And that sparking of that initial passion that I had making this pen that now carries forward into what I do today. Next one I have, boy, I really got deep on some of these. Now I'm gonna get a little less deep, just the Pilot Metropolitan. Huge fan of it. This is one of the newest ones, the Retro Pops, which this color is my favorite of the bunch. The Metropolitan has equally been kind of influential. It's a $15 pen, writes fantastic, and it's been easily one of the best go-to new pens for people getting into it. And I wish, you know, there's so many pens now that it's like, dang, I really wish these had been around when I first got into fountain pens, but I'm kind of glad that they weren't, you know, like the Metropolitan and the Noodler's pen and stuff like that. It's like, you know, I actually really appreciate these pens now, having them out now, remembering when they weren't around, because I super appreciate what they are now. So that is that's where that one comes from. And then the last one, this is gonna be a bit of a curveball. I've actually never really talked about this pen yet, but this is actually this is kind of more of a forward thinking, perhaps something on the horizon. But this is the Pilot Yukari, sorry, not Pilot, Namiki Yukari Nightline Moonlight, and this is made by Shinsai Sakamoto, who is a makie artist for Namiki, and he's got his own signature down here. He made this pen, and it's an makie pen, so it's urushi lacquer and abalone shell, and these are all individually placed pieces of abalone. And I should probably zoom in for this one because this one is pretty cool. Handmade urushi lacquer. It's a fairly heavy pen, and this is the kind of stuff that we are considering possibly getting into in the near future. When we went down to see Pilot USA in November, definitely that was on the docket, was to talk about these, you know, really fantastic pieces of art, honestly. The great writing pens, of course, like all the Pilot Namikis are. But really it's the artistry and the craftsmanship that make these pens so special. Very, you know, they're priced accordingly given the amount of time and effort that it takes to make these pens. But this is one that I acquired while I was down in Pilot, and it kind of represents perhaps a new foray into something. And, you know, honestly, when we went down there, you know, we got a chance to talk to, you know, the president of Pilot USA, as well as a couple other, you know, fairly higher up people. And the thing that I pulled out of my experience there, and I haven't gotten the video done of the Pilot tour, Pilot USA tour. I'm still working on it. Been a little busy, and I apologize for not having that done yet. But the main thing that I pulled out of that visit was just seeing the scale at which Pilot pens in general operates. A lot of which is ballpoints and roller balls, you know, G2s, the Acroball, and Pilot Precise, and things like that. And so we went down there, just little Brian and Rachel, a little mom and pop, and we went there and we saw this huge facility, and we were just like, what are we doing here? Why are we here? You know, what relationship is there for them to really kind of build with just, we are such a small piece of the pie in terms of Pilot in general. I think the G2 represents something like 60% of the rollerball market in the US, you know, so they're massive. But basically what they told us, what Pilot told us, is that their maki-e, you know, this is a technique that goes back to the 7th century in Japan. And their heritage, the tradition, legacy is really important in Japan. And essentially, Pilot, they're going to be coming up on their 100th year here fairly soon. And the maki-e techniques and the pens that they make essentially is like their history, their heritage. So even though that's not the mainstay of their business financially, it's kind of like their soul. So they view the passion that we have, what we share day in and day out with the videos and the way we service you all, and kind of the way that we can story tell. They see that we can help to kind of carry on that tradition, that heritage that really is their soul. So I was like, well, dang, well, that's kind of cool. Okay, so I mean, we're not going crazy, and it's not like, I know you could easily look at what we've been doing recently, and I'm getting away a little bit from the question now that was originally asked, but it's still important for me to talk about. I know it's easy to look and say, well, geez, Brian, you got all these gold nib pens here, they're so expensive and all that. But I want to make it very clear, I have not forgotten my roots. Like, the first year of the Goulet Pen Company, we didn't even sell pens. All we sold was ink and paper. So we have very much come from the grassroots, and I never forget that. I have and use plenty of Safaris and Metropolitans, Pilot Varsities, you know, Preppies, all that kind of stuff all day long. And now it's to the point where, okay, yes, I do have access to some of the, you know, higher end brands, and it's easy. It would be easy for me to get really, you know, luxury drunk on some of these expensive pens, you know, dealing with things like Visconti and Namiki and some of this stuff. I could very easily be like, Metropolitans, whatever. But that's not the case at all. I appreciate the full spectrum, and that kind of helps me, being like the pen hoarder that I am. I have them all, and it's like I remember what it's like. Literally every time I get a question of somebody that's new to fountain pens and all this stuff, I remember the struggle that it was for me. I didn't have anybody like me out there shooting videos like this to answer questions and put stuff out there and educate and stuff like that. I mean, I got a good start on the Fountain Pen Network. A lot of good folks helped me out there. Some of the information was maybe not as helpful coming from various sources. There were some bloggers and stuff like that out there, but it was not nearly what it is these days. You know, with like me and like Stephen Brown, Matt Armstrong, you know, Dan Smith, Fountain Pen Geeks, you know, lots of other Aziza. Oh gosh, I don't want to leave anybody out. I didn't mean to start naming everybody, but you know, lots of other good folks. Please forgive me if I leave you out. Liz Steele. I keep naming names. Okay, sorry. But anyway, so lots of good folks out there now that are doing kind of this good education thing. I didn't have that, so I remember what it was like to not know a friggin' thing. And still there's a part of me that's like, every video that I make, I'm like, dang it, I just want to help people to know more so they don't have to figure it out the hard way like I did. But anyway, so that's where I'm at. So I'm gonna wrap up this question because I could talk all day long. So that is my top 10, at least as of the moment. It's gonna be fluid. It could always change for sure, because, you know, clearly like the pens that I'm talking about like have a lot more meaning than maybe you even realize, or that I can talk about for forever. Moving on. I actually have a sealing wax question this week. So at Smadeirek on Twitter, forgive me for botching your handle, Atelier Gargoyle sealing wax. So many to choose from, smiley face. Will there be any package sets? I inevitably want them all. Maybe I should have a one of each package set. No, we don't have any package sets yet, and I haven't really had the chance to talk about Atelier Gargoyle very much, except for pretty much in this video, because we just launched them this week. So I will just kind of cover a little bit. It's a flexible sealing wax, just like the J.Herbin. Maybe even a little bit more flexible than J.Herbin. They're sold in individual sticks. Economically, it ends up kind of working out similar to the J.Herbin about price-wise, as far as, you know, how much long of a stick you're getting and all that kind of stuff. But the J.Herbin you have to buy in a 4-pack, unless you get individual sample sticks. But they sell them in a 4-pack. And so you're kind of committing to a little bit more of one color. The Atelier Gargoyle, you can get kind of more varieties of sticks of colors. So that's kind of cool. So I will probably look to talk about that a little bit more in the future, but essentially if you watch some of my really old videos on doing wax seals, it's the same concept using Atelier Gargoyle as it is when I use the J.Herbin sticks in those videos. So still works very, very similar kind of way. But yes, oh sorry, to actually answer your question, as far as package sets go, we just got them online. We're thinking about package sets that we want to do. Certainly it would make a lot of sense for us to do that, and I think we will. It's just we've been wanting to just make them available at all first, and then we'll look to put package sets together. So I don't want to give a specific timeline because it does take a little bit of time to program all that into the site to do package sets, and we have a lot going on with like year end. You know, Rachel basically helps to program all that stuff, but we're coming up on year end. We're going to have year end physical inventory and tax stuff going on, not to mention just all the busyness of the holidays. So it's not something I can promise is going to happen right away, but it's definitely on our radar. All right, we're going to close it out with a few troubleshooting questions. This one is from Lorinda A on Facebook. I've been using rubbing alcohol to clean Pilot Metropolitans, fine and medium nibs, when stuff's been dried in there, and as an intermediate rinse or short soak when I realized water wasn't getting everything out. I had assured it would be safer than ammonia. I had assumed it would be safer than ammonia or bleach, but this was apparently very wrong. Have I ruined our pens? Just the squishy inkwell part? Is this why some of the cartridges seem to leak if I try to reuse the regular Pilot cartridge with diamine or Iroshizuku ink? All right, Lorinda, this happens. You're not the only one. And I've actually talked about this fairly recently, but still I want to talk about it again because it's important. So basically, yeah, don't use rubbing alcohol to clean your pens. It's not good, especially soaking it. That's probably what did you in. Some people will use rubbing alcohol and they'll say it's fine. Probably they just haven't used it very much, or they've only used it to flush it. Essentially, here's the problem. The rubbing alcohol itself is not necessarily what's causing the damage to your pens. What's doing it is the acetone. So basically there is acetone which is put into rubbing alcohol as essentially a poisonous additive so that people won't drink it, you know, because otherwise rubbing alcohol would be, you know, without the additives like the methyl ketones and the, methyl ketone, I don't know. There's a crazy chemical name. Then the acetone is the other really bad one. Without those in there would be like grain alcohol, you know, get you really drunk. But yeah, you don't want that. So essentially when they did prohibition back in the whatever, early 1900s, when was it? It was at that time. Yeah, because of the 1920s and all that. But around that time, that's when they started to put those additives into rubbing alcohol because they wanted all alcohols to be banned. So they started putting that in there, but then Prohibition ended. They still just kept putting that stuff into the rubbing alcohol. So it's still there today. So that's what's causing problems. Acetone essentially melts plastic. So acrylic acetate is one type of resin. That's what, like Edison pens and stuff are made out of acrylic acetate. Acetone is the solvent that dissolves acrylic acetate. So you literally, if you soak this pen in if you soak it in pure acetone, it's going to melt completely very quickly. If you soak it in rubbing alcohol, it's going to melt eventually because there's not a lot of acetone in there, but it's enough that it's going to cause some problems over time. So that is basically what's happened with your pen. Metropolitan here, it's mainly made of metal, but the grip and the feed are made of some form of plastic, which is, basically some sort of acrylic. So yeah, essentially I think the acetone has eaten away or melted part of your pen. So I'm not saying like that without seeing it or knowing anything more about it. I can't say like that's the reason why your pen is leaking, but I can say pretty much like, yep, if that's what you've done, that is immediately what I would point to as being a problem. There's nothing about using Diamine or Iroshizuku ink in a pilot cartridge that would or a converter that would be a problem. The one thing I could say is maybe if you haven't damaged your pen, just if you've been using cartridges and you have the converter, make sure you have that converter pushed onto the back, because it can, if you're not very familiar with the pens, it can take a little more pressure than you realize to kind of push it on there. And you might be a little afraid, but don't be afraid, just push it in there. If you've been using cartridges, you have to kind of give those a little bit of force. It's the same thing with the converter. So it could be that maybe you just have it kind of sitting on there and it's not seated tight enough. And especially if it's leaking out of the back here, that could be causing it. So just make sure that your converter is pushed in there. If that's not it, or if you see any kind of visible wear or anything like that, it might be the acetone. And you can actually pull the nib and feed out of this pen, like so. Just kind of grab it with your fingers like that on the top and the bottom of the nib. And you can pull it out and see if there's any like weird like smoky color or any melting or weird, just general not healthiness going on with your feed. Because that is what would probably cause most of your issues, would be the feed. So that's where we're at. But in general, yeah, bleach is something you don't want to use like as a go-to, especially straight bleach. You want to dilute it pretty heavily. Bleach is not great for stainless steel. It's okay if you just kind of flush it a little bit here and there, but you don't want to use it all the time, and you definitely don't want to soak it. Ammonia, though, is actually the safest of all of these. Use a dilution, so take like a household ammonia into 10%, a 10% solution into 90% water, and then use that to flush your pen. That's a very common kind of talked about thing that a lot of people use with vintage pens and other things like that. Very common like restorative type of thing that people use when ink is kind of dried out in the pen. That's also the basis for our Goulet pen flush as well. It's an ammonia base. So that's, pretty darn safe for most fountain pens, much safer than rubbing alcohol. So take that in mind and pass it along to your friends. We don't want anybody doing anything to their pens that's going to be bad. So next question I have is from John Mayhem on Twitter. When you clean your fountain pens, do you clean the inside of the cap? Honestly, I always forget to do mine. I'll do it if it needs it, but if you're forgetting to do it because it's not reminding you, then it's really not a big deal. Usually what will happen, there's two reasons why you clean the inside of your cap, for the most part. One is if you get ink that's on the inside, especially if it's a snap cap and it has like any parts that are touching the grip of the pen, any ink that's in the cap is then going to get onto your grip, and then when you go to hold your pen, you're going to ink on your fingers because the ink from the cap is getting onto your grip. So that's usually a pretty good reminder when you're getting ink on your fingers from touching the grip. You're like, oh, there's ink in my cap. The other one is if you have a demonstrator pen like this, you're going to visibly see it. And some people it doesn't bother them, a lot of people it does, and it might just be a visual aesthetic thing. So you want to just kind of clean it so that you're not looking at drips of ink inside your cap. The way to clean it, there's a couple different ways. It's pretty easy, honestly, depending on the ink. But just fill a little bit of water in there, maybe halfway, cover it with your finger, and then shake the living, life out of it. clear it out, do it again with clean water, and do that a couple of times, and you're in good shape, honestly. If you need to get a little bit more intentionality behind it, you know, use a wet Q-tip, and then you can kind of like swipe the inside. So what I'll usually do is I'll do the water thing, and then I'll use a Q-tip and kind of like scrub it a little bit if I need to. Usually on demonstrators is only when you need to do that. The only time you run into a real issue is when you have a demonstrator pen that has an insert, or a tinted demonstrator maybe that has like a cap insert to keep the nib drier. If ink gets behind the insert, that can be a little more challenging. Sometimes the inserts pull out fairly easily. You know, things like the Custom 74 is a great example here. It has an insert in here. Sometimes you can get a little ink in there. Okay, no problem. You can honestly take, oh, I didn't grab the materials I needed to do this, but you can take a rubber band, wrap it around the end of a pencil, stick it in there, and you can pull it out of a Custom 74 or a TWSBI. Other pens don't have a removable insert quite as easily. Omos is an example of that. The Omos, I'm totally blanking on the name of the pen. Oh my gosh. I'm thinking Art Italiana, but it's not that one. It's the other one. Ogiva. Oh my gosh. The Omos Ogiva. That cap insert is like really in there. So it's not, you can get it out, but it's not as easy as like just stick a pencil in there kind of thing. You have to actually pull off the clip because the clip goes in through the insert and so on. But anyway, so that's where we're at. Yeah, no, sorry, the clip doesn't go through the insert. I misspoke. The clip, sorry, I'm having to remember this from a couple months back. Clip doesn't go through the insert, but the insert doesn't just slide right out of there. You can unscrew the clip to get out of there. Does the clip? How would you unscrew it if it can go through the insert? I don't know. I clearly need to look at my Ogiva again. But anyway, that's an example of a pen that the insert's not as easy to pull out. So that's the only thing, other kind of curveball to be thrown in there. All right, last question for the week. At JMAuti on Twitter. How do you reset a used nib? Forgive my stretching. How do you reset a used nib? If you buy an old pen, they say nibs change to the writer. True? Okay, wording's a little throwing me there on the question, but what I'm gathering from your question is if you're buying a pen that's been like adjusted to fit that individual writer like you sometimes hear about, how do you adjust it to your own writing? Well, this kind of opens up a little bit of conversation of like, how much does something really adjust to an individual's writing? Honestly, especially if you're talking about a pen with a stainless steel nib, it's really not adjusting very much to your personal writing. I think, honestly, most people are adjusting to the pen's writing. That's usually what ends up happening. Now, I will say that there are pens that can break in over time. If you have a heavy hand, the ink can flow more over time. That's what's happened with my Custom 74. My medium is a little broader than it was when I first got it because I've written with it for years. And I have a heavy hand most of the time. That is something that has adjusted to my writing. But honestly, it's not, you know, these pens are made the last decades. If they were that sensitive to be able to adjust to individuals' writing, even for one signature, it would be just as easy to adjust it back. You know what I mean? Like, you just writing with it, it's going to adjust. So I personally think the whole idea of a pen, you know, adjusting to fit your individual writing style is probably a little bit blown out of proportion for what most people are perceiving it. I do think that individuals adjust to fit the pens more, and there are some subconscious things that go on to make it, you know, you don't even realize maybe you're making some adjustments that you are, and so it's like, oh, this pen's a lot easier to write with now after a couple of weeks. Well, that's probably because you've adjusted to it more than it's adjusted to you. But no, one thing that will happen is over an extended period of time, as you're writing, a fountain pen nib, you know, the tip of that nib is usually some kind of iridium alloy or some very hard metal alloy that can, you know, it can wear down over time. It's usually a pretty long time, but if you use your pen at a certain angle or with a certain pressure or something like that, eventually that nice round ball on the end of that nib can kind of get wear down and get kind of a worn kind of flat spot. That certainly can happen. So that would be a very real scenario of like, yeah, it's adjusted itself to suit your individual writing needs because you've worn it down. And then if somebody else holds it at a different angle or something like that, it may not work as well because it needs to be reground. So that could be the situation if you're talking about, you know, an old pen like that. So if it's a vintage pen, you know, part of what you want to do when you're buying a vintage pen is you want to look at the tip of that nib and see if it has any worn spots or flat spots, because that would be an instance of, okay, I'm probably going to need to get this adjusted by a nibmeister or reground to some degree if my handwriting doesn't happen to fit like that specific spot for the nib. But you know, the whole idea of like, I can't loan anyone my pen to sign their name because it's gonna throw the adjustment out and it's not gonna write the same as it would to me. I don't really think that's that true, with the exception of if somebody's like completely abusing the pen and they don't know what they're doing and they like bend the nib or crush it or something like that, which can happen if somebody really doesn't know what they're doing. But with some light instruction, you can say, well, this is how you hold it. You don't push hard, you know, and that kind of thing. Somebody can be instructed in about 15 seconds how to properly hold a fountain pen. But, you know, the whole idea of like any pen that you hand to any other person, if they're not you, it's not going to write the same. That's a little bit exaggerated. I think more it's just you don't hand your pen to somebody that doesn't know what they're doing because they could damage your nib and then it wouldn't write the same anymore. That is true. That is potentially true. It could happen. Yeah, I think that's about it for this week. So, question of the week for this week. So this doesn't have really anything to do with the questions that I was asked this week, but it's not every week that I get to cross something off of my bucket list, getting to see Trans-Siberian Orchestra live. So I'm curious to know from you, this is not going to be a hypothetical of what's on your bucket list. I want to know what is the most recent thing that you have crossed off of your bucket list. Tell us a little bit of the story. Let me know. It could have been 10 years ago if that's the most recent thing. It doesn't have to be something you did this week because, again, a bucket list, for those of you who don't know, a bucket list is basically like things you want to do before you die. You know, if you found out you had some crazy situation where you knew you were going to pass away prematurely and you could do all of the things that you knew you wanted to do, what would those things be? That's a bucket list. Based off of a popular movie, which I haven't even seen the movie. So I'm making completely out of reference context, whatever. But anyway, so give me the most recent thing that you got to do that you really just kind of wanted to do, major life thing. And I would like to hear about that in the comments. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate your viewership and your engagement very much. So you have an excellent week, and I will see you next week, and right on.